The second time I said no to my husband, he did not raise his voice. He stood in our kitchen, his hands still, his face the color of November, and he said 7 words, just 7, quiet as a hymn verse spoken under breath, and those 7 words rearranged every room in our house. They changed the way the bishop's wife looked at me on Sunday. They changed the temperature of our bed. They changed the shape of my own name inside my mouth. But before I tell you what he said, I need to tell you about the first time. Because the first time is the reason the second time broke something that could not be put back the way it was. My name is Sarah. This channel tells the stories that Amish women carry but rarely speak. Not to judge, not to expose, just to witness. If that matters to you, I would be grateful if you subscribed and stayed a while. And if you have ever been told what kind of woman you are by someone who loved you, tell me in the comments. I will read it. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I met him at a singing when I was 17, late September. The barn still held the heat of the day and the lanterns hung on wire hooks, making the straw look like it was touched with gold. He was sitting 3 benches back, not singing loudly the way some of the boys did to be noticed. He sang the way you breathe, because you must, because it is simply what the body does. After the singing ended, he carried chairs for the older women without being asked. My friend Martha nudged me. I looked away, but I had already memorized the way his sleeves were rolled to the elbow, the careful way he stacked each chair so the legs would not scratch the floor. That was the first thing I ever knew about him. He was gentle with things that did not belong to him. We courted the way our people do, quietly, in the back of buggies with the curtain drawn. On bundling nights where we lay on the same bed with a rolled quilt between us, talking until our voices got slow and soft. He told me he wanted a farm of his own, not his father's. He told me he liked the sound of rain on a metal roof better than any song in the Ausbund. I told him I was afraid of thunder. He said that was all right, that he would be the one who stayed awake during storms. I believed him. I was 19. Believing was the only skill I had been taught, and I was very, very good at it. We married the following November on a Thursday in his uncle's front room with 200 people watching, and not one of them telling me what marriage would actually ask of me. The first year was sweet in the way new things are sweet, bright on the surface, shallow underneath. I learned his rhythms the way you learn a new house. The heavy step on the porch meant a good day. The light step meant he was carrying something inside that had no name. I set his plate first always. I laid his shirt on the chair before dawn so he would not have to search in the dark. I kept silence during his morning prayer, standing at the stove with my hands folded over the spoon, waiting for his amen before I moved again. This was what proper meant. Not a word anyone said aloud, a shape I was supposed to pour myself into, day after day, until the shape and I became the same thing. There is a word in our community, Gelassenheit. The English have no clean translation for it. It means yielding. It means surrender. Not the kind with a white flag and a battlefield. The kind where you stop believing you have a separate self at all. You give yourself to God. You give yourself to the community. You give yourself to your husband. And somewhere in that giving, the you that existed before the giving is supposed to disappear. I was taught this was peace, and for a while it was, I will not lie about that. There was a season in my marriage when the surrender felt like warmth, like being held inside something larger than my own small life. Both things are true. The beauty and the blade lived in the same word, 4 years in, 3 children. My body had become a calendar of duties, feeding, cleaning, mending, canning, planting, harvesting, carrying, kneeling, rising, carrying again. By evening, I was not tired the way English women describe tired. I was emptied, poured out like water from a jar that no one thinks to refill. And on one particular night in May, after the dishes were washed and the children were sleeping, and the house had settled into its own breathing, the wood cooling, a horse shifting weight in the barn, the last cricket of spring outside the window, my husband reached for me in the dark. It was understood. It was the unspoken rhythm, and for the first time in 4 years of marriage, I said no, not loudly, almost a whisper. I cannot tonight. 5 words, barely louder than the cricket. He did not yell. He did not ask why. He turned away from me and the mattress shifted with his weight. And then there was nothing but his breathing in the dark. I lay there for a long time, waiting for a question, for anger, for reassurance, for any sound that meant he saw me as a person who had just spoken and not as a duty that had failed to perform. Nothing came. The 18 inches between our bodies felt like the width of a field I could see across but could not walk through. I pressed my hand flat against my own chest just to feel something warm. The next morning, he was not cruel. That is important. He was not cruel. He was correct, polite in the way you are polite to a stranger at a market. He said thank you for his eggs with a voice that had no warmth, no cold, no weather in it at all. And I noticed, the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue, that when he walked behind my chair, his hand did not touch my shoulder. It had touched my shoulder every morning for 4 years, every single morning. A small, absent-minded press of his palm against the back of my dress as he passed. Gone. The older women in our community had told me before my wedding, a good wife does not have her own tiredness. I understood now what they meant. They did not mean I should be strong. They meant I should be invisible. Over the next several weeks, the distance between us closed, slowly, like a wound that heals from the edges inward but leaves scar tissue in the center. He touched my shoulder again. I did not say no again. Things returned to what looked like normal, but something had shifted behind my ribs. Something I could not name but could feel, the way you feel a change in weather before the sky shows it. I began to count, not consciously at first, but I counted the days between. I counted his moods by the angle of his hat when he came through the door. I counted the minutes between his arrival and the moment his eyes would move over me in a certain way. I became a mathematician of dread, charting numbers no one asked me to chart, solving for a variable I was never supposed to question. 6 months passed. November came. The first frost painted the fence posts white, and on a Tuesday evening, with the kitchen still smelling like canned applesauce and the children sent to his mother's house. For the night, I said no for the second time, and this time he had words for it. The children were at his mother's house. That was the detail that mattered. In our home, the children were always present, sleeping in the next room, breathing through thin walls, their small sounds filling every silence with something soft. But that Tuesday night the house went empty in a way it almost never was. He had arranged it. I understood what the arrangement meant. When he stepped toward me in the kitchen, I did not step back dramatically. I did not push his hand away. I simply turned my body a half step to the left, the way you shift when you are carrying something fragile and someone reaches for it too quickly. I need tonight to just be mine, I said. 8 words. I had not planned them. They came from a place below planning, below duty, below the years of learning to pour myself out without asking if the jar ever got filled again. He stood very still. The kitchen clock ticked. The gas lamp on the counter threw his shadow long against the wall behind him, and I remember thinking how strange it was that his shadow looked exactly the same as it always did, that a man could be changing inside and his shadow would not show it. Then he spoke. Not loudly, not with heat. He said it the way you would say the day of the week or the temperature outside. You are no longer a proper wife. 7 words. I felt them land in my chest the way a stone lands in still water, not with a crash, but with a weight that sends circles outward into everything. My hands went cold. The clock kept ticking. Opened my mouth to say something. I do not know what, and nothing came. He walked past me, through the doorway, up the stairs. I stood alone in the kitchen with the smell of applesauce and the sound of his boots on the wooden steps above me, each one a little quieter than the last, until there was nothing. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands around a cup of coffee that went cold and stayed cold, and I thought about the word proper. It is a small word, quiet. It does not sound like a weapon. But in our community, proper is not a description. It is a border. On one side of it, you are a wife, a mother, a woman who belongs. On the other side, you are a question, a problem the community needs to solve. I knew what happened when a husband believed his wife was no longer fulfilling her duties. It did not go to a court. There were no papers. It went to the bishop not as a complaint but as a concern, mentioned softly after Sunday service, shared over coffee at a kitchen table where the words sounded like care but carried the weight of a verdict. I sat there in the dark, and I understood that my husband had not just named me. He had opened a door. 2 weeks later, the bishop's wife came to visit. She brought a loaf of friendship bread wrapped in a white cloth. She sat at my table and she smiled the way a woman smiles when she already knows the answers to the questions she is about to ask. "How are things? Sarah," she said. "Is he well? Are you keeping up all right?" Each question had a second question folded inside it, the way a letter is folded inside an envelope. You cannot see the words until you open it, but you know they are there. I answered the way I had been trained to answer. "Everything is fine." I said it with my hands steady and my face arranged into the expression of a woman who has no cracks. She stayed for 40 minutes. She complimented my bread. She touched my arm when she left. And she walked back to her buggy with a plate of my oatmeal cookies and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has completed an errand she was sent to. Complete. I stood at the window and watched her leave, and I felt something I had no word for. Something between shame and fury, and a loneliness so specific it had a taste like iron on the back of my tongue. The first real snow came that week. The children returned home, and the house filled again with the sounds that had always saved me. Small boots on the floor, a daughter laughing at nothing, my youngest son carrying a barn cat inside his coat, its face blinking out from the collar like a second heartbeat against his chest. I knelt on the kitchen floor and pulled off wet mittens, one finger at a time, and I pressed my lips to a cold forehead, and for a moment the word proper was very far away. This is the part that people outside our community do not always understand. The same world that wounded me also held these moments. The cat in the coat, the bread rising on the counter, the way the snow turned the fields into something clean and new. Both things lived under the same roof. Both things were true. I held them both because that is what women like me learn to do. You hold and hold and hold, and you call it strength because no one has offered you a better name for it. Months later, at a quilting circle in February, I was stitching a star pattern beside a woman named Mary. I had known Mary since girlhood. She was steady and plain-spoken, and she laughed more easily than most women in our district. That afternoon, she said something while her needle moved through the fabric, said it lightly. "The way you mention weather. My husband told me last week that I forgot how to be a wife." She almost laughed when she said it. Almost. The other women kept stitching. No one looked up. The needles kept moving through the cloth in their small, even rhythm, and the silence that followed her words was the loudest silence I had ever sat inside. I looked up. Mary's eyes were already on mine, and I saw in them something I recognized, not because she explained it, but because I was carrying the same thing, the look of a woman who has been given a label by someone she loves and who is trying to survive the label without losing either the love or herself. I understood then that this was not my story alone. It was a pattern stitched into the fabric of how we lived, quiet, unspoken, carried by women who smiled at quilting circles and answered, "Everything is fine," when the bishop's wife asked. I want to tell you that there was a single moment when everything changed. A door I walked through, a sentence I spoke that rearranged the world. But that is not how it happened. It happened on a Tuesday morning, weeks after the bishop's wife's visit, while I was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. The sheets were heavy with water, and the March wind was cold on my fingers, and the pins kept slipping, and a thought arrived. I did not invite it. I did not build it from logic or courage. It was simply there, fully formed, the way a child is suddenly there after months of waiting, whole and breathing and impossible to send back. The thought was this: what if proper was never mine to become? What if it was always theirs to define and theirs to take away? I stood there with a wet sheet in my hands and the wind pressing it against my body, and I felt something shift. Not in my marriage, not in my house, not in any room anyone could see inside me. In the place where I had stored every lesson about yielding and silence and surrender, something moved, not loudly. The way a foundation settles, you do not hear it happen, but afterward the doors hang differently. If you have listened this far, I think you understand why stories like this need to be told, not to judge a people or burn down a way of life, just to witness what is carried in silence. My name is Sarah, and this channel exists because some things should not stay buried under quilts and good manners. If that matters to you, I would be grateful if you subscribed. And now let me finish. I did not leave. I want you to know that. I am still here, still married, still Amish. I still set his plate before mine. I still lay his shirt on the chair before dawn. I still keep silence during his morning prayer. But something inside the architecture of my obedience has changed, and he can feel it even if he cannot name it. I am choosing now. There is a canyon of difference between doing something because you have forgotten you have a choice and doing something because you have remembered you do and you have chosen anyway. He called me improper. Maybe I am. Maybe proper was never a thing a woman could be, only a thing a woman could perform until her arms gave out. I do not know if he will ever understand what his 7 words did. I do not know if the bishop's wife will come again. I do not know if Mary ever found her own Tuesday morning, with wet sheets and wind and a thought she did not invite. But I know this. Maybe you know what it feels like to be told what you are by someone who loves you. Maybe you know the particular weight of a word that was meant to keep you in place. If you do, you are not improper. You are not broken. You are just awake. Being awake inside a sleeping house is the loneliest, bravest thing a woman can be. Tonight I will lie in our bed. The quilt will smell like cedar and lye soap. The dark will be the same dark it always is. He will breathe beside me, and the 18 inches between us will be there, the way they always are. But I am not counting anymore. And for the first time in a long time, that small distance feels like exactly the right amount of space.